Well, welcome back. President Cyril Ramaphosa will step aside if he is criminally charged. Now, this is according to presidential spokesperson Vincent Magwenya, and it follows the alleged theft of US dollars from President Ramaphosa's Phala Phala farm, and this allegedly took place in 2020. Meanwhile, the ANC has moved to clarify its vetting processes for candidates and the eligibility to contest the elections at the upcoming national conference. And those that cannot contest include anyone with a judgment of a jail sentence of more than 6 months, those who've been found guilty of misconduct, and those who have been placed under suspension. Now, this follows the party's NEC meeting over the weekend. Dr. Thapelo Tselapedi is a political commentator and lecturer at Rhodes University, my apologies, and he joins us now for a discussion on this. Dr. Tselapedi, thanks so much for your time. Welcome to Morning Live.
Thank you, and welcome.
So, firstly, let's start with the ANC NEC and just your thoughts and reflections on the positions taken in the NEC this past weekend over some of, one would imagine, the top-line issues that will come up at conference.
I mean, you've already talked about them. One of them, obviously, being the issue of eligibility to national conference contestation. And I think that was quite important, especially the one that's dealing with the Integrity Commission and whether it has a negative judgment against one individual. I think that was obviously important. I think the other decisions around, Ntate Zweli and Ntate Cyril Ramaphosa around that eligibility is quite interesting as well. Obviously, people are holding on to their candidates towards the National Elective Conference in December. But I think that obviously shows a stalemate in the NEC. So it would be quite interesting moving forward. I do think that given the reports that we're seeing also around the discussions on Palapala, which seemed to have taken quite a lot of time on that 3-day meeting, is quite sad, obviously, given the problems that we have, particularly around, one of the things that I was hoping to hear was around the issue of really Eskom in much greater detail. And part of the problem of Eskom is that a lot of businesses, particularly small businesses, are also closing down. And I think there needs to be an engagement on that. But on the whole, I think it was good that they finally met, obviously, given the 2 years that they were not able to physically meet. And I think obviously the big test will be at the national conference, given how they've presented themselves as sort of unified, were able to get through a lot of difficult points. I think we'll see how Nasrec looks like to really determine this meeting.
So before we get back to that, during that report back, the president actually spoke about the nominations process, branches having put forward their nominations, etc., but said that the substantive issues, his summation was basically that the substantive issues perhaps hadn't been as robustly discussed and dealt with, and hoping that this would happen at Congress. But we know that even there, it is the election of the top 6 and then the NEC that will take precedence over anything else. So no surprises really in that we didn't hear about a substantive issue such as Eskom and other very important matters really being crashed out by the ANC NEC.
No, I think for a long time now, and this is just not a function of the presidents of that day, Cyril. I think for a long time, the ANC has been navel-gazing. I think quite a lot of issues have been sort of secondary to the primary issues of internal squabbles, organizationally at least, of the ANC. So I think this meeting and what he said really is a reflection of that. But the other side to this is that obviously for a large part, the government has been sort of leading discussions or sort of contributing discussions towards the ANC. So I think a lot of people thinking that, well, if we're not going to discuss these things, at least we'll be able to discuss these things in government. Having said that, we must, of course, bear in mind that there was a policy conference that took place earlier on, mid-year, and that there will be a national conference that will have different commissions to discuss all of the different policy policy proposals. Of course, I think the biggest issue right now is Palapala and the different factional politics, whether KZN, Eastern Cape, but I think that's to be expected, given I think for a large time the navel gazing of the ANC. So that's not going to be any something new, really.
Dr. Tselapedi, what is your assessment of how the ANC and President Cyril Ramaphosa have dealt with the Phala Phala issue?
Look, I think obviously the Integrity Committee tried to enter that, and I think obviously given the responses that, by the president that, well, this matter is still pending a legal matter, so he can't really speak on that matter. But it's quite clear, given the public perception, that the president has brought the ANC into disrepute, and I think the Integrity Committee was able to, make that clear in the sense that well he's brought damage to the image of the ANC in terms of at least its public standing. So to that extent, I think the Integrity Committee was quite correct. But obviously, given the this reminds me of what Ntatezweni had done a few months ago, I think, when he stepped down, given the revelations around corruption there. I mean, it's quite interesting now, obviously, that Cyril is not doing the same, even though there has not been any charge sheet or investigation, sort of, that will bring him to court, at least in that manner. So I think the ANC has not been obviously quite consistent in dealing with issues of this nature, and that's quite glaring. And I think that has been glaring earlier. I talked about how, the compromise that was made between Ntatezweni and Cyril, that they're both eligible for contestation, regardless of the determination of the integrity committees. So I think they've just not applied their own, values and their own policies consistently. Yeah.
So the whole Phala Phala saga, as you say, there is no charge sheet at the moment. Is that in itself not rather surprising? And the way in which all of this is being dealt with, remembering this is a crime that allegedly took place in 2020.
Yeah. I mean, look, I think the now that everything has been brought out in the open earlier in the year, people, I suspect, whether your NPA need to, and in fact also the Reserve Bank, they need to be able to determine whether there is prima facie evidence to constitute, charges against the president. Of course, then you have the matter of the parliamentary inquiry also into whether this is an impeachable matter or not. So definitely, I think we can talk about, well, there has not been any sort of fast-moving response to the matter of Phala Phala. But I think there is a lot of attempts to determine whether there is prima facie evidence against this. I think obviously looking, from, for a person like me or any ordinary citizen looking from outside in, there are quite a lot of glaring issues around the legality of this money. That pertains, of course, to both the NPA and the Reserve Bank. And whether this is an impeachable offense, given that the president is a full-time position and he has no other role and responsibility outside of that. So definitely, just generally on the surface level, the optics don't look good. The optics does obviously suggest that there was a lot of illegality here. But I think let us as ordinary citizens wait it out legally. Of course, if people are taking quite a long time, we can make a determination that perhaps the justice system may be threatened, given the issue around independency and so on. But I think it's still too early for that.
And one just would like to imagine how this is going to play out, because if the ANC deals in one way with those contesting for the top 6 positions with regard to the step-aside resolution, there has to be consistency, one would imagine, in the nominations and also the election of the NEC, which is a much bigger cohort, and maybe not people wielding the same amount of power as those that would be in the top 6. But how are they going to deal with this? And by perhaps not really dealing with this matter head on, is the ANC likely to cause more problems for itself down the line?
No, certainly. I think that's, I obviously don't know how they're going to deal with that, but certainly there's a problem here. And I think you see it in the provinces where one province calls to do the scrapping away with this matter around, people being, people stepping aside, saying that actually this is being abused. And of course that's going to happen. The ANC is a political organization that's trying to sort of bring in legal principles. Legal principles operate on the basis of neutrality. I think a political organization necessarily is about contestation of power internally and contestation of power externally. So obviously, when you try and bring a sort of legal device or legal instrument as step aside in the manner that you have, without letting it being voluntary, it's definitely going to look like the bigger power within the organization wants to get their way, and they're dealing with people that may be oppositional to them. I have no idea how they're going to deal with them. I've always thought that the step aside was not quite necessary given the ANC's constitutional frame around dealing with issues of corruption and dealing with issues of public perception and standing of the ANC. But it's here now, and it would be interesting how the conference resolves on the issue of abuse of this sort of step aside thing and just the lack of consistency.
Yeah. And then responding to questions on working relations between Minister Lindiwe Sisulu and the president's spokesperson said that the relationship is a cordial one, and it is believed that they have a good working relationship, given the latest that Minister Sisulu has now openly called for Ramaphosa to step down. What do you make of that particular relationship and also others? But I also want to know, some people have said, well, Mr. Magwenya should not be focusing on the step-aside rule. He should focus on what happens in the presidency, in government. And therefore, again, some thinking that there's a blurring of the lines between party and state. Please explain to us, why that is or isn't necessarily a problem.
Look, I think the issue for me stems from why isn't Minister Sisulu not then resigning, given the fact that she views the president in a particular light? If you think that the president, basically your boss, is not fit to be boss and is unethical, I think you then have a responsibility to give or provide an ethical response to that. So it's interesting to that extent as to why then she hasn't chosen to leave. I think if you see quite a number of ministers prior to Ntate Cyril becoming president, who did not support him as well, by the way. Some of them chose not to be in government. So such decisions were made by officials and national representatives of the ANC. So it honestly bewilders me as to why then Minister Sisulu is not sort of doing the same thing here. But on the issue of the blurring of lines between sort of party and state, this has been happening for quite a number of years in this country. Really, at the dawn of the first national elections, it's quite difficult to make a separation between, obviously, government officials and the ANC, given the dominance of the party. Now, if you will remember, if my in fact memory serves me right, was a time where under President Thabo Mbeki, there was the Secretary General of the ANC, but there was also a spokesperson within the presidency of the ANC. That spoke on behalf of President TM. So those are sort of interesting, things that I think they were trying to, was an attempt to separate between state and the party. And obviously now the spokesperson to the president, to President Cyril, obviously will have a difficult time separating between what is party and what is state, given that naturally the attacks against the president of the ANC are attacks against the president of the republic. And I think it would just be unnecessary to have a bloated then labor, in the sense that you create a spokesperson for the party and you create a spokesperson for the government representing the Cyril Ramaphosa. So I think those things are always going to be with us, and you see them in a number of democracies, at least. That's not particularly unique to South Africa, for that matter.
So just as we go into December, or maybe still some 2 weeks away, a month away to be precise, from that conference, are you confident that the ANC could come out of this stronger, given the lead up to this 55th Congress?
Look, I think we should be, this is obviously a bit of a difficult one, I think, given the problems that the ANC sort of, puts on the state and the problems that the state puts on ordinary citizens. But I think the ANC, since NASREC, since the election of Cyril Ramaphosa, has been able to be unified. And by that, I mean, to the extent that there's not been any sort of expulsions or any group of people who leave and form their own political party. So to that extent, I think they've been quite they've done quite well organizationally. But I think moving forward, that may be able to sustain that. But I think it's quite clear about who are the people who don't belong in the ANC and who are the people who do belong in the ANC in their eyes by now, I'm sure. So I don't think one should expect a united ANC. I think what is good as well, though, is that we haven't seen a lot of factional or slate politics moving towards this conference. I think people who have been largely been supported by branches and regions and the provinces, whether top six and whether just normal NEC officials, have been people that are one ordinary and are known by the branches, and they don't come from a slate politics that, well, we're against this slate and we're against this other slate. And I talk about this also in the context of Ntatezweni Mkhize. It's I don't see it here as slate politics. And I see a lot more diverse people contesting for the top six and officials. So that's interesting to watch. But obviously, I do think there will be the remnants of obviously the RET faction. But like I said, it should be clear about really who belongs, who doesn't. The ANC has all that it requires to renew itself. I think the issue is will and a whole host of stuff here.
Well, Dr. Thapelo Tselapedi, thanks so much for your time. And Dr. Tselapedi is with Rhodes University and discussing the latest ANC National Executive Committee meeting over the weekend.